The rain fell hard against the cracked windows of a rundown hospital ward, its rhythm echoing the desperation inside. A once proud woman, who had always believed her wealth and beauty would shield her from life's cruelties, now sat trembling. On a cold metal bench, her elegant clothes soaked, her eyes darting with fear. For years, she had mocked others, sure that her status would protect her. But tonight, fate dealt her a merciless twist. The only person standing between her and the collapse of her world was the very boy she had once humiliated, mocking his skin, his poverty, his worth. He had returned not as the broken child she dismissed, but as the man holding her fragile future in his hands. And with each second, the question grew heavier. Would he choose vengeance or mercy? Naomi had grown used to the rhythm of clattering plates and muffled conversations that drifted through the restaurant each evening. The small-town diner where she worked wasn't glamorous. Faded red booths lined the walls, the neon sign outside flickered more often than it glowed, and the scent of frying oil clung to her apron long after she went home. But for Naomi, a young black waitress barely in her 20s, it was more than a job. It was survival. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her posture tall even when exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. Each shift began the same way, wiping down the tables with a damp rag, tying her curly hair into a neat bun, and taking a deep breath before the evening crowd arrived. She had dreams beyond the chipped counter and coffee-stained menus, but reality pressed close. Rent was overdue. Her mother's medicine bills piled on the kitchen table. Every dollar mattered. The regulars knew her by name. Some treated her with kindness, leaving a little extra change as a gesture of appreciation. Others barely noticed her, speaking over her as if she were invisible. Naomi learned to scan faces, the hurried businessman with impatience in his eyes, the traveling family with children eager for dessert, the elderly couple who sat in the corner booth every Thursday. She greeted each with the same steady smile. But beneath it, she carried the quiet ache of being underestimated, dismissed, and, far too often, judged before she ever opened her mouth. It wasn't the first time she had felt the sting of subtle cruelties. Naomi had grown up on the poorer side of town, where cracked sidewalks and peeling paint marked the houses. She remembered walking to school in worn shoes, clutching her books while others laughed at her frayed backpack. Their words echoed even now, too poor, too dark, too little to ever matter. It was a chorus she had learned to silence by working harder, standing straighter, and refusing to let bitterness define her. Her resilience, her refusal to be defined by others' perceptions, was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. The A restaurant became her stage, a place where she could prove, if only to herself, that she belonged. Yet beneath the surface, tension often simmered. The town had its unspoken hierarchies, lines drawn not just by money but by color, and Naomi felt those invisible walls press against her every day. On a Saturday evening, the diner buzzed louder than usual. A local businessman, wealthy and well-dressed, sat at the center booth with his family. His wife's diamond bracelet glimmered under the fluorescent lights, and his voice carried across the room like he owned it. The staff moved quickly to please him, careful not to make mistakes. Naomi noticed how the cook leaned in, how the manager personally checked on their table, and how every eye seemed to turn toward the man's approval. Naomi moved gracefully from table to table, balancing trays heavy with plates of fried chicken and steaming bowls of soup. She caught fragments of conversation, the businessman's booming laugh, his wife's sharp tone, the whispered remarks of other diners comparing themselves to the family's wealth. It wasn't jealousy Naomi felt, but something more profound, a reminder of the imbalance that never seemed to fade. The family's behavior, their condescending remarks and dismissive attitudes, served as a stark reminder of the social and racial dynamics that Naomi faced every day. And yet, Naomi was not alone in the room that night. In the far corner, unnoticed by most, sat a man in plain clothes. His suit was simple, his watch understated, his eyes observant. He didn't draw attention to himself, but Naomi noticed him. She always saw the quiet ones. He sipped his coffee, slowly, watching interactions with a calm intensity as though each detail mattered. She didn't know his name, nor why he chose this diner over the sleek restaurants uptown, but she felt his presence like a shadow lingering just beyond her awareness. Little did she know, his presence would soon become a turning point in her life. As Naomi refilled a coffee cup at another table, a knot tightened in her chest. She couldn't explain why, but something about that night felt different, heavier. The conversations were sharper, the glances colder, and beneath the laughter at the wealthy family's table, there was a cruelty she had seen before. It was the kind of cruelty that could unravel someone's dignity with a single careless remark. The weight of the night's events hung in the air, thick with tension and anticipation. She steadied her breath, reminding herself of the lessons she had learned. Patience, resilience, silence when silence was safer. But deep inside, a question stirred. How much longer could she endure being overlooked, underestimated, and quietly bruised by words left unchecked? Naomi didn't yet know that this night would test her courage in ways she had never imagined. Nor could she see that the quiet man in the corner was no ordinary diner guest. He was watching, weighing, waiting, and soon his presence would change everything. As the evening progressed, the diner's usual chaos of orders, clattering kitchen, and overlapping conversations continued. However, Naomi couldn't shake off the sharp edge she felt in the air. It was in the way the wealthy businessman's family looked at her, the dismissive tone in his wife's voice, and the faint smirk on their daughter's lips. These small things added a weight to the otherwise bustling atmosphere. Naomi approached their booth with a tray of drinks, her practiced balance. Not enough to shield her from the wife's muttered insult that was loud enough for the surrounding tables to catch. The words, "Careful. Don't spill. We wouldn't want stains on real clothes," cut through Naomi like a blade, leaving a deliberate and cruel mark. The soft chuckles from a few diners, trying to hide their amusement, only added to the weight of the moment. Naomi smiled politely, nodded, and walked away, her heart pounding as if she had been physically struck. It wasn't the first time. She had endured countless small humiliations in her job, customers refusing to look her in the eye, leaving pennies as tips, or snapping fingers to summon her as if she were beneath them. But tonight felt different. Each remark landed heavier, sharper. She caught the businessman glancing at her with open disdain, whispering something to his son, who laughed and shook his head in response. Naomi's chest tightened. She wanted to shrink, to vanish, but something inside her resisted. At the counter, she steadied her hands, gripping the edge until her knuckles whitened. She thought of her mother, frail at home, depending on her paycheck for medicine. She thought of the younger Naomi, clutching torn notebooks while classmates mocked her skin, her clothes, her voice. That same burning ache returned, the ache of being made small, forced into silence. But Naomi was not just a victim of these humiliations, she was a survivor. She had endured, and she was ready to fight back. But silence had its cost. As she wiped, down a nearby table, she caught sight of the man in the corner booth. He was still there, calm, watchful. His eyes met hers briefly, and though he offered no smile, no nod, there was something steady in his gaze. It was as if he was saying, "I see you, I understand, and I'm here." That look anchored her, gave her strength to keep moving. It was a small gesture, but it made a world of difference to Naomi. Moments later, the businessman called out for her again. His voice was loud enough to hush nearby conversations. "We've been waiting too long," he barked, though their food was already being prepared. Naomi hurried over, offering an apology. She knew it wasn't her fault, but the words came anyway. because apologies kept the peace. When she returned with their plates, the family didn't move to make room. She leaned carefully, sliding dishes onto the table, when the daughter deliberately shifted her arm, knocking a fork to the floor. The girls smirked as Naomi bent to pick it up. The wife whispered something that made them all laugh. Naomi felt her ears burn, her throat tighten, but she placed the fork back gently and whispered, "Enjoy your meal." As she walked away, her mind churned. Why do I always bend? Why do I always stay quiet? The weight of years pressed against her chest, every insult swallowed, every injustice endured. Tonight, it all resurfaced. The undercover man watched with an almost unsettling stillness. He stirred his coffee slowly, his expression unreadable. But his eyes never left the table where Naomi was being tested, mocked, humiliated. The night dragged forward. More customers arrived, laughter rose, plates clattered. But Naomi's world narrowed to that booth. She heard each word, each slight, each chuckle behind her back. She felt her strength waver, her smile crack, her hands tremble with every trip to the kitchen. And yet she stayed, because walking away wasn't an option. Then came the moment that tipped the balance. As Naomi delivered dessert, a slice of pie and a sundae, the businessman leaned back, crossing his arms. His voice carried again, sharp enough for half the diner to hear. "This is why some people stay where they are. They're made for serving, nothing more." The words hit her like a thunderclap. Conversations faltered. A silence rippled through the diner, broken only by the hum of the overhead lights. Naomi froze for a heartbeat, her hand gripping the tray. Her chest ached as though every insult from her childhood had returned at once. She forced herself to breathe, to set the plate down gently, to walk away without letting them see the tears burning in her eyes. In the safety of the kitchen's shadows, Naomi leaned against the wall. Her hands shook violently, her throat tight with the scream she could not release. Her co-workers bustled past, too busy to notice. She closed her eyes, whispering silently to herself, "Hold on, just hold on." But something inside her had shifted. She thought of her mother's words. "Dignity is not given, Naomi, it is claimed." She thought of every moment she had been silenced, every bruise left by words unspoken. And she knew, tonight, she could not stay silent. When Naomi stepped back onto the floor, her face was calm, her stride steady, but within her chest, her resolve burned fierce. She approached the table once more, refilled a water glass, and quietly slipped a folded note from her apron pocket onto the table beside the businessman's plate. The family didn't notice. Not yet. But the man in the corner booth did. His eyes sharpened, his coffee untouched now, his attention locked on Naomi's small act of defiance. He leaned forward ever so slightly, as though recognizing the weight of what she had just done. The note was more than paper. It was a spark, a choice, a risk, a silent declaration that Naomi would no longer accept humiliation without answering back. The room hadn't yet realized it, but the night was about to shift. The weight of her decision hung in the air, palpable and charged with anticipation. And with that slip of paper, Naomi set in motion a chain of events that no one in the diner, not even she herself, could have foreseen. The note lay folded beside the businessman's plate, silent but heavy. To anyone else, it was nothing more than a slip of paper, but to Naomi, it carried the weight of her dignity, the sum of every insult she had ever endured, and the courage she had been too afraid to claim until now. She had written it quickly in the kitchen, her hands trembling but determined. The words were simple, raw, and impossible to ignore. "Your cruelty does not make you powerful. It only shows your weakness." This act, this note, was her declaration of independence from fear and oppression. The businessman didn't notice at first. He was too busy laughing at some joke he had told, his booming voice filling the diner. But the moment his eyes landed on the note, his laughter faltered. His brow furrowed, his hand froze mid-gesture, and for a beat, the air seemed to stop. He picked it up, unfolding it with a casualness that looked rehearsed, as if to show the room he had nothing to fear. But as his eyes scanned the words, his face darkened, his jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, and suddenly the diner's chatter dimmed. The wife leaned in, confused. The daughter craned her neck. The boy snickered until his father's glare silenced him. For Naomi, every second stretched into an eternity. She stood a few feet away, tray in hand, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure others could hear it. Her knees threatened to give way, but she refused to move. She had made her choice. The businessman's voice came low at first, almost a growl. "Who left this?" He held up the note like evidence in a trial. The diner turned quiet, forks pausing mid-bite, conversations halting in the air. His wife demanded to see it, her face twisting with indignation as she read. The daughter scoffed, rolling her eyes, but the tension in her movements betrayed unease. Naomi felt every gaze shift toward her. She didn't need to confess. The truth clung to her like a second skin. She lifted her chin, her eyes steady, refusing to shrink back into invisibility. For the first time, she stood not as a servant waiting to be dismissed, but as a woman daring to confront. The businessman's lips curled into something between a sneer and a smirk. "So, the little waitress thinks she can lecture me?" His voice was sharp, mocking, designed to provoke. He waved the note in the air as though it were nothing, yet his tightened grip betrayed his agitation. Naomi said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own kind of defiance, louder than any words she could have spoken. Then, unexpectedly, the man in the corner booth moved. For the first time all evening, he set down his coffee cup and stood. His presence drew immediate attention, not because he demanded it, but because he carried himself with a quiet authority that could not be ignored. He walked toward the center booth with unhurried steps, his gaze fixed on the businessman. Conversations resumed in whispers, questions flickering across the faces of the other diners. Who was this man? What business did he have here? Stopping beside the table, the stranger spoke calmly, his voice steady but firm. He didn't scold or shout, but every word carried weight. He explained that cruelty in public spaces was not just unkind, it was corrosive to society. Belittling those who served was not a sign of strength, but a sign of character's bankruptcy. And then, with deliberate clarity, he revealed what no one expected. He was no ordinary diner guest. He was the owner and CEO of a growing company, one with contracts that directly intersected with the business world. The revelation was a thunderclap in the quiet diner, shattering the businessman's illusion of power. The businessman's face drained of color. His wife blinked rapidly, stunned. The children fell silent, their bravado crumbling. The revelation shifted the air in an instant, from a theater of humiliation to a reckoning. The undercover CEO turned, his eyes meeting Naomi's for a fraction of a second. In that glance, she understood. He had seen everything, and he wasn't about to let it pass unnoticed. He faced the businessman again, his voice measured. When power is used to belittle, it corrodes. When it's used to uplift, it builds legacies. Tonight, you showed everyone who you are. His words were not just a reprimand, but a call to arms against the misuse of power. Whispers rippled through the diner, diners leaning in, astonished. The businessman opened his mouth to defend himself, but the weight of silence pressed harder. His reputation, his authority, the facade of superiority he had carried, it all faltered beneath the eyes of those who had witnessed his cruelty exposed. Naomi stood frozen, yet a new strength surged within her chest. She hadn't known what would come of her note, whether it would lead to ruin or dismissal. But as she watched the tables turn, she realized her small act had sparked something larger than herself. She had forced truth into the open. The businessman lowered the note slowly, his hands trembling despite the effort to hide it. His arrogance deflated, replaced by a hollow silence that felt louder than any protest. Around him, the stares of strangers burned with judgment, the kind that could not be erased by wealth or titles. In that moment, Naomi understood that the risk she had taken was not just for herself. It was for every unseen worker, every silenced voice. Every person forced to swallow humiliation day after day. She had stepped into danger, and instead of breaking, she had lit a spark others could not ignore. The diner held its breath, waiting for the fallout. And Naomi, for the first time in her life, did not feel small. She felt unsure. The silence in the diner lingered long after the CEO's words faded into the air. The wealthy businessman sat stiffly in his seat, his hands pressed against the table as though anchoring himself against a tide he could no longer control. His wife shifted uncomfortably, her diamond bracelet glinting under the fluorescent lights, no longer a symbol of status, but a reminder of how hollow their performance of superiority now appeared. Their children, once emboldened by his laughter, avoided his eyes entirely. Naomi stood nearby, her tray clutched against her chest, her heart still hammering but steadier now. She had not known what would happen when she slipped that note beneath his plate. She had only known she could no longer endure silence. And yet, the consequences were unfolding before her in ways she never could have imagined. The undercover CEO, now revealed as a man of influence and authority, did not raise his voice, did not gloat, did not humiliate in return. He held the businessman in the weight of truth, his calm composure speaking louder than fury ever could. He gestured toward Naomi. This young woman did something tonight that many are too afraid to do. She stood against cruelty. That matters. His courage in standing up for Naomi's actions was a beacon of inspiration in the diner. A ripple of acknowledgement moved through the diner. Patrons nodded subtly, some murmuring agreement. The elderly couple in the corner exchanged a look of quiet pride. Even those who had once chuckled at the businessman's sharp remarks now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, ashamed of their complicity. Naomi's throat tightened. She had not sought recognition. She had only sought to reclaim her own dignity. Yet hearing those words, she felt something unlock inside her, something she had kept buried for years. The businessman muttered under his breath, his pride refusing to surrender. But the power he once commanded in the room had evaporated. No one laughed at his jokes now. No one leaned toward him for approval. The very air had shifted, and he was left isolated, his authority stripped bare. He tried to pass the note back across the table, but his hand shook, betraying the image of control he desperately clung to. The CEO remained standing only long enough to make his point clear. Then, with quiet finality, he turned back to his booth, leaving the businessman to sit in the wreckage of his own arrogance. He had said enough. The rest was left for others to absorb. For Naomi, the moment was both surreal and grounding. She returned to her work, her movements deliberate, her chin high. But this time, each step felt different. She was no longer the invisible waitress moving silently through the shadows of other people's importance. She was the woman who had acted, who had dared, who had been seen. The rest of the night moved slowly. The businessman's family ate in uneasy silence, no longer loud, no longer commanding the room's attention. They finished their meal quickly and left without another word, their departure marked not by grandeur, but by the quiet relief of the other diners who no longer had to endure their presence. When the door closed behind them, a strange lightness filled the diner. Conversations resumed, softer but warmer now. Someone clapped faintly before stopping, as if unsure whether applause was appropriate. Naomi exhaled, her chest loosening for the first time all evening. The other diners, too, felt a collective sense of relief, no longer under the oppressive presence of the businessman's family. At closing time, as the last tables emptied and the lights dimmed, the undercover CEO approached the counter. He asked for the check, though his meal had been modest. Naomi rang it up with hands that still trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the aftershock of everything that had transpired. He handed her a folded bill, more than generous, and slid the signed receipt toward her. On it, in neat handwriting, were 5 words that sent a shiver through her. "Your courage will be remembered." The impact of his recognition was profound, igniting a new sense of self-worth within Naomi. Naomi blinked, looking up, but the man had already turned toward the door. He offered her a final nod, acknowledgement, not pity, and then was gone, leaving her with the echo of his words and the possibility that her life had just shifted in ways she could not yet imagine. That night, walking home beneath the hum of streetlights, Naomi felt the world differently. The same cracked sidewalk stretched before her, the same chill wind tugged at her coat, but inside, she carried something new. It was not wealth, status, or security. Still, it was something greater. The unshakable knowledge that her voice mattered, even when delivered in silence on a folded note. Days turned to weeks. Word of the incident spread quietly at first. Patrons who had been there retelling it to friends, whispers of the CEO's presence and the businessman's humiliation reaching further than anyone expected. The diner's reputation changed, too. People came not just for the food, but for the sense that something meaningful had happened within those walls. Naomi unknowingly became a symbol of courage whispered about in the community. She did not bask in the attention. She continued her work with the same steady diligence, but with a new lightness in her step. She began to imagine possibilities she had long buried, returning to school, pursuing dreams beyond the diner, believing she was worthy of more. As for the businessman, his reputation suffered wounds deeper than he admitted. Contracts slipped through his fingers, opportunities dried up, and whispers of his public disgrace followed him into boardrooms. He learned too late that cruelty leaves stains money cannot erase. In the quiet of her small apartment, Naomi often thought of that night. She thought of the trembling in her hands, the pounding in her chest, and the moment she chose to act anyway. She thought of her mother's words about dignity, about how it must be claimed, not given, and she realized finally that she had claimed hers. The story does not end with riches or a sudden transformation. Naomi still faced bills, still worked long hours, still carried the weight of survival. But she had something else, too, a fire inside her that no insult could extinguish again. And perhaps that was the true victory, that the poor black girl mocked by the world had grown into a woman who would never again bow her head in silence. Her story left behind a question that lingered long after the diner emptied and the note disappeared into memory. When faced with cruelty, will you stay silent, or will you choose the courage to speak, even if your voice trembles? Write in the comment box. Like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching this video.